I stayed in a hotel that was totally abandoned. Now I know why. A phone call came in with the sun and found me sleeping in a shitty hotel bed somewhere deep in the buttholes of southern New Jersey. My head hurt like hell, my stomach was about 3 seconds from turning, and I just wanted to get some rest. But motherfucking Todd couldn't help himself. The dude was like a corporate wind-up doll, born and bred in the basements of corporate America to wake up at the crack of dawn and take everybody's money. It rained last night. Right, Mike? He coughed through a mouthful of menthol lozenges. I heard water on the roof, and the wind. Geez, the entire building shook like the devil himself was playing maracas. My memory took a few seconds to catch up with the conversation. We'd been driving all day through the turnpikes and over endless skyline bridges that hovered high above the factories of the northeast. We didn't arrive at the dingy little inn until sometime around 9 that night. The lights were all off. The lot was dark. It was drizzling then, at least I thought as much. Anyway, I went out for a cup of coffee this morning. The ground was bone dry. I can't figure out why. An old alarm clock buzzed next to a row of empty bottles. The television blared white static. I wasn't really listening. I couldn't even find my pants. The room bore all of the typical signs of my personal downfall. A large empty bag of potato chips was stationed by the refrigerator with a case of Blue Moon carefully placed beside it. The mattress was soaked with sweat and the sheets were twisted about. It looked like somebody either had an exorcism or got drunk watching reruns of family comedies. Given my history, I settled on the latter. That's not even the weirdest part, Todd whispered. Nobody's here. I checked the halls, the lobby, bathrooms. The entire building is empty. It's freaky. I took the comment with a grain of salt. Todd had a tendency to worry. That was actually putting it mildly. The man was a full-blown panicker. His fear of flying was the sole reason we were forced to drive 500 miles across the fucking country, shilling shitty software to worse people who didn't care all along the way. His anxieties weren't even the worst part. It was the colossal arrogance that drove me up a wall more than anything else. He was one of those guys that seemed to take sadistic pleasure in competition with the GPS. Every wrong turn was a victory in the battle of Todd versus the technology. That was how we ended up so far off the beaten path. Some people just don't want their tribal knowledge to be lost. I bet he could have stuck that quote in his corny little PowerPoint. "Are you ready yet?" he asked. "Let's go. I don't like this place very much. Something about it gives me butterflies, and not the fun ones." As much as I hated to admit it, he wasn't totally wrong. We booked the rooms through one of those shady discount travel sites, about an hour ahead of showing up there in the first place. The building seemed modern enough. The parking lot was well lit, and the lobby was decorated with hung plasma TVs and new furniture. But when we made it to the front desk to check in, there wasn't a single person around to greet us. No clerks, no guests, nothing. Just a single sign-in sheet, a stack of faded brochures, and a rack full of keys labeled in neat, faded handwriting. We grabbed 2 at random. Todd shuffled toward his room, and I found the minibar in mine. After that, things got hazy. "Seriously," he snapped impatiently. "Let's go. I'll meet you in the lobby in 5 minutes." I gave it a second before I got out of bed. The nausea eased with a gulp from a plastic water bottle stashed under my pillow. The shower didn't run, and neither did the sink, so that same bottle came in handy when I needed to brush my teeth. I finished getting ready and hated on myself in the mirror a little bit. I wasn't the type to drink myself stupid. It was just a transition period. Nothing was bad. Nothing was good. I was just in a rut. At least, that was the excuse. We met by the checkout desk. Nothing had changed. The lobby was quiet and untouched. Chairs were still perfectly angled around fake plants, and the same stack of brochures sat patiently collecting dust on the counter. I looked around for a bathroom that actually worked, but before I could find it, pretentious sneakers squeaked down the hallway behind me. "Welcome to scenic White Valley," Todd announced in his best radio voice. home of absolutely nobody. He looked way too pleased with himself for a Monday morning. His checkered polo was buttoned all the way to his chubby little neckbeard, and he wasn't wearing a tie or blazer, so it was a rare day off from the prototypical uniform. He struck me as the type of guy to read Business Insider's column on how to blend in with your people on the road. I guess the previous day's cufflinks just weren't cutting it. You could almost smell the effort in the form of Draco Noir. "Are you driving?" he sniffed. "I'm ready to take a nap." I looked around for a restroom first. The public one was on the far side of the atrium, past a row of planters and artwork in the form of abstract shapes and buzzwords. I left my bags with the human robot and made my way across the room. The floor was freshly polished, and each step clapped back off the walls with a sharp echo. Inside the bathroom was a single toilet. The tissue dispenser was empty, but the sink still worked. There wasn't a signal on my phone, and the news was a day old. None of my calls or texts were going through. That didn't seem out of the ordinary, though. There hadn't been service for miles. I finished cleaning up and stepped back out into the atrium. Something was off. Everything looked the same. The same tall windows, the same red paint and manicured furniture. But a detail had shifted. Maybe something in the air. I couldn't quite tell what. Like the whole room had been rearranged when I wasn't looking. I turned a corner. Then I saw her. A woman stood beside Todd. She was older looking, with grey, streaked white hair that hung past her shoulders and eyebrows so thick they formed a single line across her brow. Her uniform didn't match. I don't know why I noticed that first, but I did. The shirt had one logo and the hat had another. Her pants were too tight, and rolls of stretch mark-ridden skin leaned out the side of the gap in between her shirt. She didn't say anything, initially, and that was the creepiest part of it all. She just sort of stared at me, like she expected something to happen. Todd kept just as still. He shot me a quick look before his eyes dropped to the floor. "Mike," he whispered when he talked. I realized then that I had never heard him be quiet about anything. "I think we better do what this woman asks." I pulled the key out of my pocket and set it on the desk. "All right. Does she want us to check out?" No sooner than the words exited my mouth, a sharp screech ripped across the atrium, loud enough to force us to our knees. The tone shifted up and down in frequency. It was piercing one second, then rough the next. I couldn't figure out where it came from until something dropped behind the front desk. My attention shifted to the chalkboard. That's when I noticed the knife. "Go," the woman grunted. "Now." She dragged the blade across the board a second time. It was horrible. Todd screamed, but I couldn't hear his words. I could only see his lips move. We got back up to our feet. Then she pointed at the front door. "Go," she repeated. "Now." We got up and walked. The stranger followed. I didn't look back at her. I didn't have to. I could feel her breath hot on my shoulders. Her steps fell into an uneven echo, like her shoes didn't fit, or she hadn't moved in a while. I glanced over at Todd, and his normally polished eggshell had already begun to crack. Sweat gathered on his collar and soaked through the pits of his polo. His expression looked like the features on his face had frozen somewhere between apology and panic mode. "Please," he whispered. "I don't know what we've done to offend you. Just let us leave." The knife poked gently into my back. "Go." We kept it moving. The double doors led to a courtyard in front of the building. Outside, the garden was decorated with flowers and benches. The smell of fresh mulch felt like freedom. I could see our car in the lot. There was nobody else parked there. I hoped this mystery woman, fucked as she was, would simply let us get in and drive away. Maybe she thought we were trespassing, or whatever, but at least then we could put this whole knife-point encounter behind us. We marched in an awkward sort of procession, and after the first 100 steps, I was sure that we were home free. But just as Todd reached into his pocket to find his keys, the blade slashed across my peripheral vision. Fuzzy white dice fell to the ground. Bright red blood followed. "Go?" We walked on. Todd limped beside me. He was quiet now. We left the parking lot behind after a few hundred feet. The manicured landscaping transitioned into a dirt path between dense trees. The forest was quiet. Branches crisscrossed overhead, low enough that we had to duck in places. The woman stayed behind us. A hill rose out of the woods with the early morning fog right above it. We reached the crest. That was when the valley opened up in earnest. "This can't be real," Todd mumbled out in front. "Does nobody work in this town?" A clearing about a mile wide spanned a gap in between the trees. Every inch of it was covered with people. There were parents with kids and folks in uniforms. There were wheelchair-bound patients in hospital gowns and beds with monitors and nurses attached. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, but not one of them said a thing. It was disturbing. They were the quietest group of people I had ever seen. Nobody coughed, nobody whispered, nobody laughed. They didn't even seem to look at each other. The only sounds were the steady movement of their feet on the dirt and the soft rustle of clothing that brushed together. A weather-beaten brown building sat at the center of the clearing. It couldn't have been taller than a couple of floors, no wider than about 100 yards. There weren't any roads that led to it, no walkways either. It looked like somebody had just taken the place and plopped it in the center of the valley. The structure itself was in rough shape. Vines crawled across the face of the faded red brick. Weeds gathered around the foundation. The roof sagged in the middle, a drain pipe dangled from the side, and the windows were stained to the point where we couldn't see through, even in the daylight. A sign over the awning read "Library" in chipped white lettering. The woman pointed ahead, and we hustled down the hill to join the crowd. The group was packed tighter towards the front. The people seemed exhausted, or angry even, like the journey had taken everything out of them. Todd tiptoed beside a burly man in pajamas. I fell into line behind a mother and her 2 young children. I tried to get them to look at me. The kids, the adults, anybody. I wanted to scream, but I could still feel the knife against my back, and every wrong move felt like it could cut my kidney right out of the fat. "My daughter expects me to be home tonight," Todd spoke plainly through the throngs of bodies. "She won't understand why I'm gone." Nobody answered him. The townsfolk were restless by this point, arms and shoulders pressed up against my back. One lady nearly nicked her hand on the knife. A row of heavy boulders had been laid out to form a path through the field. The formation funneled the people into a tight wedge near the door, but they weren't moving. It was like they were stuck. The big man in pajamas shoved a gurney aside and forced his way to the front. He slammed on the oak exterior with his fist 3 times in rhythm. The double door swung open, and then the crowd started to move. The whole line broke apart. Parents ditched their families. Nurses abandoned their patients. The push from the back didn't stop. A few people fell down next to the rocks. One of them was an older man with white hair and a gold t-shirt ripped at the seams. He vanished beneath the weight of rushed footsteps and appeared again, face down in the dirt. "What are they doing?" I shouted over the chaos to the stranger behind us. "What the hell is this?" She glanced at me and smiled like it was obvious. "They're hungry." The crowd rushed into the building like salmon headed upstream to spawn. Dust kicked up behind them. Floorboards creaked under the weight. The stampede was over in about 10 seconds, and then it was quiet. A handful of people hadn't made it inside. Some were moving. Some, like the old man, were not. I'll never forget the look of determination on a teenager with mangled legs and a row of bloodied cuts in his face. He dragged himself toward the door, inch by inch, until a last-minute straggler shoved him back down. His skull hit a rock with a sickening crack. He didn't move after that. "Go," the woman gestured. "Inside." We did what she told us. The inside of the library looked like it had been furnished by someone with a very small budget and a fond memory of the year 1997. The walls were pale green and covered in laminated newspaper clippings about science fairs and fundraisers. The chairs were upholstered in faded fabric and arranged around metal tables stacked with old magazines. An empty fish tank sat on a low shelf, but there wasn't any water, just a plastic log and a thin layer of gravel. "What the heck are we doing here?" Todd spat. "We have a right to know." The stranger tilted her knife towards a staircase tucked into the back corner of the room. She seemed more agitated than before, almost antsy. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she kept scratching her neck until the skin turned red. Her fingernails were peeled and bloodied. There was a look on her face like a crackhead hungry for a fix. Go. The air got hotter as we climbed. The steps rose above a long and narrow hallway where the mob had already vanished from view. At the top was a plain grey door with the word storage labelled at the top. Our captor fiddled with the lock for a second, then she poked the broad side of the blade into Todd's back. Inside. The room was small and slanted at the edges, almost like a makeshift attic office. A closet took up the far corner. 2 narrow windows let in bright sunlight that illuminated a thin strip like tape across the wood paneling. The air smelled of old carpet and mouldy paper, combined with something sharp and chemical. "Stay here," the woman shouted. "No leave." And with that, the door slammed shut. A lock clicked behind it. Todd paced around the narrow space in tight circles. His breathing got heavy. He swallowed hard and pressed a hand to his chest. He looked like he was about to pass out. For a second, I thought I was going to have to catch him. "We need a way out," he babbled. "Mike, we can't stay up here. You understand that, right?" I didn't say anything back. There had to be something useful in the room, something we could use to defend ourselves or help us escape. I tried the windows and they were rusted shut. I pressed my palm into the glass and shoved. Nothing moved. What are we going to do? The closet was next. A cardboard box sat near the back with a faded Home Depot logo stamped on the side. I pulled it out and crouched to check the contents. Inside was a toolbox that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. A broken level sat beside a pair of pliers with the grip half melted. An old, rusted hammer rested on top. "This will work." I went back to the closet to take another look. A gap in the floorboards had opened where the toolbox had been. Pale light bled through the cracks. The smell coming off it was stronger than before, and it was thick with chemicals, something like bleach or melted plastic. It stung a little when I breathed it in. "Do you hear that?" At first, I thought it was the pipes, but the sound didn't match anything I'd heard before. It was a rhythmic clicking in steady, gurgling intervals, almost like wet lips trying to keep time over a beat. I dropped down to the ground and pressed my eye to the gap in the floorboards. That's when the room beneath us opened up, and I knew we'd stepped into something we weren't meant to see. "What is it?" Todd snapped. "What's happening?" The main hall was massive, but everybody was gathered around the center. A row of pushed-together desks guarded 3 thick steel drums. A small group of young women in white moved between them in slow, deliberate circles. Each of them dragged long-handled ladles through the surface, through pools of translucent orange liquid. The whole crowd watched them work in silence while the concoction bubbled like lava and melted cheese. "Not sure," I muttered. "Looks like they're lined up for something." A figure stepped into view from the furthest queue. I recognized the face. He was the same kid from earlier, the one who cracked his skull on the pavement. Something about the way he moved just seemed wrong. The bones in his legs bent at awkward angles. Each step was like watching a puppet try to figure out its strings. His face was pale and streaked with dried blood, but he didn't seem to mind the cuts and bruises. He just kept going, arms at his side, eyes ahead. "This is weird," I muttered out loud. "Now they're getting ready to eat." The teenager shuffled in front of the vats. He seemed to be the first of the townsfolk to be seen by the lunch ladies from hell. They swarmed him in a group. One of them looked him up and down. Another sniffed him by the collarbone. Apparently satisfied with the result, the 2 of them scurried out of the way, while a third forced the kid down to his knees in front of the bile. She lifted a utensil to his nose. She pinched his nostrils. She waited. After a moment, a pale white slug forced itself free. "Oh my God!" I covered my mouth to keep from vomiting. "This is sick." The woman caught the thing in her dish before she walked toward a smaller drum at the back of the room. She lowered it inside carefully, like it was made of glass. The kid went limp. One of the others stepped in behind him and gently dunked his head into the orange slop. He screamed when the second slug emerged from the slime. Then he sobbed as it crawled across his mouth and up his nose. "They're parasites," I muddled my words, trying to explain. "They're inside of them." The kid twitched. His eyes rolled back. For a second, I thought he was about to collapse again. Then his whole body seized. He snapped upright and started laughing. It was a hysterical, panicked, frenzied sort of laughter. The type where you have to catch your breath in between. He bolted across the room and slammed his head into a wall. Then he bounced off and did it again. And again. He dropped to his knees and stared at the blood on his hands. Then he licked them, slowly, as if he was savoring the taste. Todd reached around me and pulled the hammer off the toolbox. I couldn't stop him. Everything happened too fast. There wasn't any time to react. He stepped past me and smacked the window with one clean smash. The glass cracked and blew apart. Shards bounced across the floor. I was still looking through the crack in the floorboards when the energy shifted. Every head in the hall below snapped toward me. Not toward the window, not the noise. Me. Like they knew exactly where I was. Like they'd just been waiting for a reason. And then they started to run. The teenager was the fastest. He pushed the others out of the way as he dropped to all fours and sprinted to the door at the end of the long hallway. I got up and started to move myself. Todd was trying to force himself out of the window, but he didn't quite fit. His pants were torn where the jagged pieces bit deep into his legs. His shirt was covered in red. He twisted hard, trying to shove through, but the frame scraped him raw. He yelled back at me as footsteps rushed up the steps. Then he turned around. There was something evil in his eyes when he hit me. I slammed into the floor hard. My head bounced against the tile and everything got slow. My ears rang. My vision pulsed at the edges. I could still hear him moving somewhere above me. Todd. He was angry about something. The door burst open. The mob poured in. The man in pajamas spotted him first. Todd had one foot out the window, but the cuff of his khakis was caught on the radiator. He couldn't move. The big guy yanked him by the ankle and pulled him back inside. The rest of them screamed like animals. They clawed at his arms and dragged him across the floor. Todd kicked. He begged. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't mean to. They didn't care. They hauled him out the door and back down the stairs, still yelling, still pleading for me to come and save him. And then it was quiet again. I waited by the door for a few seconds, just long enough to know they weren't coming back. The screams didn't stop. They only got worse. Todd's voice had turned hoarse and jagged, like he swallowed some sandpaper. There weren't any words to be heard anymore, just guttural moans. The mob loved it. They made these horrible little noises. Snorts, gasps, something that almost sounded like applause. They were excited now, and that horrific fucking clicking sound didn't stop either. It only got louder. I stepped through the doorway and into the hall. My legs wobbled, my skull throbbed. The world tilted every few steps, but I didn't stop. I just walked, down the steps, through the library, and out the front door. For a moment, I felt guilty. I really did. But then I thought about the hammer, and those stupid fucking khakis, and all of the horribly condescending moments that led to the one when that cowardly, selfish little asshole tried to sacrifice me so that he could survive. And then I just kept moving. The woods were cold and dark then. The early morning had given way to a gentle rain that slipped through the trees and clung to the branches. Mud sucked at my shoes. Branches scratched at my shoulders. I followed the same path we took in and ended up in the field that led to the parking lot. Our car was still parked at the back. I spotted the keys with the little white dice in the gravel where we left them, wet and smeared with blood. I picked them up, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I stared through the windshield for a while. Then I started the engine and drove away. That night, I reported everything to the police in my hometown. I felt safer there. I expected they'd ask me more questions, maybe even think I had something to do with it. Maybe I did. I still couldn't shake the guilt of leaving my coworker behind. Before long, the secretary returned and told me they had located Todd. They spoke to him on the phone, and he was a little shaken up, but alive and well. I couldn't believe it. 2 days later, A postcard arrived in the mail. Greetings from scenic White Valley, signed Todd K.